Ooh, first stout cask whiskey as well, Tim. Super excited. I like beer casks is such a kind of untapped potential for Scottish whiskey, even though like it's the UK, like beer flows through their goddamn rivers. So, but yeah, welcome, Larry. You all good? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good to be here.
Fabulous. Alrighty. Well, I'll get underway and do the intros and everything. Welcome everyone to this break even tasting for Cu Bocan. I hope I'm saying that right. Just family tonight. No special guest for this one, but considering Larry's kind of a behind the scenes guy, and this is his wonderful debut, I suppose he can be a bit of a special guest. So us at the whiskey list recently brought in a selection of Cu Bocan whiskies, and of course we weren't going to leave them unopened and untried. You know, we have to do our due diligence and our research and our taste testing. And so yeah, we love to share these drams with you guys for cost price, so you get the chance to taste them as well. This is going to be particularly interesting because there's not a lot of peated highland whiskies that we see super often. I think Ardmore is probably the only one with a majority peated malt, and they straddle the border between Highland and Speyside. So depending how you want to classify them for your own convenience, some companies do. But yeah, and then I think Edredar and Glen Turret. And more recently, we've seen expression from Glenglasser. So, you know, it's definitely a growing market of Highland peated whiskies, which is very exciting. Um, uh, but, you know, even still, it's a rare sight to see Tomatin. Again, I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. I've been saying Tomatin for years. Someone told me it was Tomatin, and I'm going to go with their judgment. But yeah, it's not something I've seen a lot of. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to have an entirely new expression from the distillery coming out. So before I delve in and spend the next hour absolutely butchering all the Gaelic words, got housekeeping to go over. I recommend having 6 glasses so you can go back and compare each dram if you have the glassware for it. As usual, please don't drive after. These whiskeys aren't crazy high in ABV, but we encourage responsible drinking. All the tastings are recorded as well for those who want to watch them back or who can't join us tonight. They'll be up on our YouTube channel, so like and subscribe and all that good stuff. There will be a brand article going up at some point, all about Tomatin, if you wanted to read about the brand further. That should be published this week or next, whenever I find the time to get to it. But please pop your tasting notes for all the whiskies in the chat, and any questions that you might have. Obviously, it's just Larry and I flying solo, so there's a limited amount of information that I can get. Obviously, would have loved to have someone from the distillery here, but I will try my best to answer all of your questions. But yes, tasting notes are always super, super welcome. I love hearing what you guys think about it. And especially with a virtual tasting like this tonight, you know, break even tasting, it's all about getting your feedback. So I think we might delve in. Have I popped the tasting note order in the chat? No, I have not. That is so terrible of me. But yeah, so tasting note in the chat. We're going to crack right into it with the signature. And I will tell you a little bit about the distillery. So the first kind of sort of manifestation of Tomatin Distillery was built and operated from 1897. Sorry, getting my numbers mixed around. And that lasted pretty much up until 1906. So a short 9 years, which is kind of a blip in the span of Scottish whiskey. It was initially founded by Tomatin Spey Distillery Company, who, from all accounts, sort of didn't know what they were getting into, just that whiskey was booming and they wanted to ride the wave. So they opened up the distillery in the town of Tomatin, obviously named the distillery after the town. And Tomatin is actually Gaelic for hill of the juniper bush. So they at least had the foresight to identify a good site that had fresh water supply. The town of Inverness isn't too far away, and it had a railway line that ran right nearby. So like they they set the distillery up for success in a really great location. And that success did not come. They even went so far as to build 30 houses for distillery employees, which is a really old school Victorian way of operating at the time. But actually, 80% of the current Tomatin distillery employees still live on site today in those houses, which is pretty cool. With the housing market and everything like that, I don't blame them. It was closed after 1906. So after then, it was reopened in 1909 under new management. A London wine trading company who formed to become Tomatin Distillers Co. And that proved way more successful than the previous owners. But the wine background of the company meant they had excellent access to wine casks that could be used for maturation, and that focus on wine casks is still in use today. As we will get through and see some of the whiskies, it is definitely a signature of the brand. Tim says it's actually a very pretty sight at the distillery that they have there, especially on a sunny day. You were probably there on the one sunny day of the year that Scotland gets. I haven't seen too many, but I will say I was on Ireland. They're like, it was warmer here than it was in England. I was like, your idea of warm is 12 degrees. Like, this is not relevant at all. So the Cu Bocan signature that we have now, this expression was initially part of a limited edition series that they launched in August of 2019. But obviously they named it Signature, probably so they could easily transition it as an entry product if they continued doing peated releases. So all of Cu Bocan is peated Tomatin. It's lightly peated to around 15 ppm, which is similar to places like Ardmore, and like a touch below distilleries like Talisker, who do that around 20 ppm level of peat. So it's a light to moderate peat is what I suppose they would call it. So this is ex-bourbon cask, ex-Oloroso cask, and Virgin American oak casks, and all of it's a minimum of 8 years old. They gave someone gave me a number breakdown. So it's 60% bourbon, 25% Oloroso, 15% virgin oak. I'm gonna pour myself some. Too busy talking.
I found the story of where the Cu Bocan name has actually come from with a bit more detail, but I don't know if Larry knows the story as well.
Yep. So the word Cu Bocan, if you're Scottish, is Cu is actually Gaelic for dog, and Bocan is a ghost. So there's a legend that there's this hellhound that roams the fields around the distillery, and as a tribute to this myth or legend, is that they decided to range a peated style of whiskey, very lightly peated, as we're discovering, in tribute to this, and hence the range called Cu Bocan. I think the first bottlings were around 2013. Emma, I stand corrected, but I think it was in 2013 that they decided to do this. And the interesting thing is that they only do it for a very short period of time. They only do it during the winter months, and it's a very short run of that. So pretty much all of the Cu Bocan releases are limited releases. So it's not a mass-produced stuff, and everything is done on a batch basis. So what we're trying tonight, although they will have their core range, which we're going to go through, every year there will be a different batch. So there will be slight differences and variances between the core range whiskies.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think from everything I was looking at, it was like 2013 was when they started heavily laying down the peated stuff, and it was like 2019 would have been It's like, okay, cool. Some of it's ready to bottle and whatnot now. But yeah, love the tasting notes. Everyone's getting like a stone fruit, peaches, Brendan malt, honey, straw. Feels like there's a berry of some sort hiding back there. Yeah, I get a little bit of like honeysuckle dew as well. It's that like kind of earthy, honey, flowery thing to it. I don't know how many of you guys spent your childhood picking honeysuckle flowers just to get the the syrup out of them, but it's a distinct. They had them everywhere in my elementary school in California. So yeah, it's a taste I love. It's very nostalgic, but Mike's finding it a bit waxy as well. Yeah, the peat as well is like it's just like a saltiness. It's more of that kind of salinity rather than smoke, but like you could err on that white ash. But mm, not a bad one to start off with. Tim was saying you had about 8 days of 20 plus degrees and sunny when you went to Scotland in May. Very jealous. I will be going in mid-November, early December. So I'm packing all of my thermals, all of my warm things. So yeah. Tim doesn't show the Oloroso cask influence much. Michael's right, expert informed. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that I think that the ex-bourbon is really dominant. They must have been like refill Oloroso casks or something like that. Even the 15% virgin oak is giving like a little bit of that greenness, but it's not super strong coming through. Turn my heater off so I can smell it properly. It's bloody cold down here in Melbourne. It's almost got this cured meats. It's that cured meat speck or something like that. It's got a little bit of that smell of a log of speck ham. But yeah, John, you come just in time. We're only starting with whiskey number 1, the signature. So number 1. Is that the right way around? It is the right way around. Look at me, all ready for YouTube and all. But we might move on to, so John, we've started with the signature, but we might move on to whiskey number 2, the 12-year-old. So yeah, 2013 would have been when they started really properly laying down these casks, like Larry said. So they're finally at the point where they've got a little bit of age under their belt, which is good to see. So a little bit more about the history. So, I like to split it up. We're only partway through. And it is quite an extraordinary history. So yeah, wine casks were predominantly the core maturation style for the distillery. But obviously in recent years, they've expanded, especially with the regulations around Scottish maturation coming down a little bit and easing a bit. But when they were, in their heyday under the London Wine Trading Company, things were going great. The industry was booming. In 1956, they added 2 more stills 2 years later, and even more in 1961, which brought them to 11 sets of stills. For reference, places like Deanston just have like the 2 sets of stills and that's it. And then apparently even 11 stills wasn't enough. Eventually in 1974, they ended up expanding to the point where they had 23 stills. I think that made them, what was the capacity, Larry, you said?
Like 12 million liters. They were effectively in the mid 70s the biggest single malt producer of whiskey in Scotland. a little known fact.
Yeah. So in that year of 1974, they added the 12 stills.
Yeah, I think
to make it up to 20.
Sorry, Emma. I think to put things in perspective, 12 million liters is currently more or less what Glenlivet and Glenfiddich produce today, sort of 50 years later.
Yeah, so not a small quantity of whiskey by any means. And yeah, they were the largest in Scotland at the time. They were massive. Their single malt was going out for blends. It was going out to international export markets. But this dramatic expansion spelled their downfall. Like, it obviously could not last. At the time when they were adding all these stills, it mirrored this high in the Scotch whisky climate. Distilleries were booming, demand was high across the globe, everything was great. But, you know, like economists talk about the bubble bursting, the bubble burst. And the whiskey lock of the 1980s was just around the corner. And this, they call it the whiskey lock or whiskey lake because it was, you may as well pour your barrels of whiskey into the lake because that's about as useless as it is. You know, it's worth less hanging on to it than it is throwing it away. And yeah, even the big companies were shuttering their spare sites, distilleries that weren't really producing a lot of turnover for them. Yeah, and the lock was caused by this imbalance in the whiskey economy. They'd become too overconfident that the boom would last forever, so everyone had begun overproducing. And then when the decline in demand hit, a lot of them were unprepared with how to handle the excess that they now had. So guys like Port Ellen was one of these distilleries closed. But because Port Ellen had a malting floor, they were like, well, we'll just close it and hopefully reopen it in the future, which they now have. But then other distilleries like Glen Albyn, they were like, nah, there's no way that we can potentially ride this out. So they demolished Glen Albyn to make way for other buildings. So Tomatin was looking like they were gonna, you know, go the way of all the other distilleries and get shuttered. And the owner of the company went bust in 1985, but it was actually saved by two of its bulk customers, who I will talk a little bit about more later because I think they tie in really well to whiskey number 3. But yeah, so regarding whiskey number 2 that we're all enjoying here now, the 12-year-old. So this is finished in Caribbean rum casks from Guyana and Barbados. So when we talk about rum casks from those areas, Guyana particularly, there is only one distilling company there called Demerara Distillers, and they make El Dorado rum. So I'm working on a relative basis that one of the rum casks is from El Dorado rum. Barbados casks are a little bit trickier to isolate because there's a few of them. But the two biggest Barbados rum distilleries are Foursquare and Mount Gay. Mount Gay is pretty small, like in terms of I don't really think I've seen any independent bottlings or any casks going about. So most likely it's Foursquare casks, but I can't guarantee. They're like, oh, it's just vague Caribbean rum casks, you know, because I can't really say, but I would presume this is probably El Dorado and Foursquare rum casks finished off. I couldn't find out. Larry, do you know how long the rum finish is? From a 12-year-old?
If I remember correctly, they were talking around about a year to 2 years in the rum cask. But they didn't quite disclose it. It was in sort of casual conversation that was mentioned. Bearing in mind that from Tomatin's perspective, Cu Bocan is kind of seen as an experimental bottling. So the emphasis is obviously on the peat, albeit that everybody is saying that, yeah, it's very lightly peated, and I agree. In many instances, a lot of people wouldn't even say it's peated with some of the expressions, and they have got a extensive range of diverse casks that they're playing around with. So if you're looking for something that's pretty fun, we're going to see on a continuous basis some very interesting releases coming out from Tomatin with this particular range of whiskies. But don't expect the big peat hit. It's not their style. It's not where it's at. Fruitiness, as I think a couple of you had mentioned earlier, is very much the core thread that you're going to find through all the range.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Michael, in response, yes, I hope that the whiskey lock doesn't happen again in our lifetime. But
amen to that.
I know. I do think Scottish distillers are a little bit more considerate, I suppose, in terms of production.
Yeah, it's become more of a business today. If you take into account that sort of in the late 70s, pretty much all of the distilleries, the single malt distilleries, were producing whiskey for the blenders. Other than Glenfiddich and maybe one or two others that went out on an all-out campaign to market whiskey under their own label. And incidentally, everybody said to Glenfiddich, you guys are not going to last in business with this kind of business strategy. Interesting perspective. Everybody else was selling their whiskey to the blenders. So when the downturn hit the big guys, whether it was Buchanan's or Diageo in its previous entity. So if you take the brands, the Bells, J&B,
Black and White,
Dewar's, Ballantyne's, etc., they started turning around and saying to a number of their suppliers, well, it's hitting us too, this downturn in whiskey. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our formula to some extent, and we're going to leave out some of the whiskies. So J&B, as an example, Justerini and Brooks, they had, I think, something like 53 different single malts in their blend at one time. And, just turned around to smaller guys. Pityvac was one of their suppliers. I think they turned around to them and said, sorry, we're just not going to buy any more from you. And they effectively closed the distillery down because of that. So as you said, Em, let's hope we never ever see a repeat of that again.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, curious to see what drink rum normally. So I'm not much of a rum drinker, but I definitely get that, like, there's this kind of coconut husk greenness that kind of not too dissimilar to the first one, but it's gone like that little grilled pineapple tropicalness. Michael's getting tropical fruits on the palates. Is anyone else getting anything? Brendan says better on the palate than the nose. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I'm getting the vibe that it's just like that's good, but it's not like poof, wow, coming at you.
I think one of the other things that I really like, Em, about the Cu Bocan is that the minimum bottling strength is 46%, and with every single release that they've had to date, it's all been natural colored and non-chill filtered. And they've said to me that there's no intention to actually change that. So I said, what about some cask strength Cu Bocans? And it was, well, watch the space. So who knows what we might see in the future.
I think that that'll be interesting to see. I've been through my cask strength phase. Now I'm back into like whiskey that I can stick a straw in and just drink a whole bottle in a night. I've come back round, but yeah, so it'd be really, really cool to see some more interesting, more viscous cask strengths. So for the rum one, David's easy to drink, light, sessional, summery whiskey both summer drams. Yeah, I think when I was looking through all the information, a lot of reviewers were like, it's still a summery whiskey despite being peated. And I think that that's like such a standout kind of, you could put this in a highball as well, and it's just like refreshing for a hot day. It's got all the tropical fruit as well. But yeah, interesting. Well, let's move on to whiskey number 3, creation number 2. Not confusing at all. So obviously, speaking of interesting interesting casks with the rum casks and interesting casks that they've got laid down. Michael's like, peated? I don't know, maybe. So really, really cool to see a Shochu cask. I think this is probably one of the first I've seen from Scotland. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But so when Tomatin was about to shut down, it's 1985, things are not looking good. But they did have a lot of large bulk export markets. And two customers for those markets, Shuzo and for me to pronounce them Tomatin, they were ordering large quantities of whiskey for the Japan and Asian markets. And not wanting to lose their steady and quality supply of single malt, they purchased the distillery, which made Tomatin the first Japanese-owned distillery in Scotland, which is really cool. Okura & Co. eventually sold its stake to Takara Shuzo and another Japanese corporation. And then they've been steering the reins of the distillery ever since. So in 2013, they kind of first laid down burns. And one really interesting thing to note as well is Cu Bocan is only produced for a short period of time at the distillery, and it's produced during the winter months at the distillery. So that comes down to production. You get like a more of a mouthfeel if you produce in winter, because you don't have to run your cooling as heavily, but you would have to run your condensers a little bit hotter. Really, really interesting. So, David, great question. Can I explain what Shochu is? So, Shochu is a predominantly Japanese spirit. There is a similar kind of spirit in China and Korea, I believe. But Shochu is a fermented grain wine liqueur kind of thing. So sake is typically produced from rice, but you can get sweet potato sake and regular potato sake and brown sugar sake. Shochu is very similar. I believe the difference between the two is to do with the amount of sugar and the fermentation, like the yeast, similar to how like different fortified wines, they're all fortified wines, they're all the same, but the yeast and the fermentation makes them slightly different. So the Shochu's predominantly barley is the base grain for, or base spirit, but you do see quite a lot around that are brown sugar, sweet potato. You don't really get rice Shochu as commonly from what I saw, but it is super, super cool. And then if you took a Shochu and then added a flavoring to it, like flavor sugar, Rob, we are up to whiskey number 3, which is the Japanese Shochu. There we go. I'll put the full tasting note in the chat, tasting order in the chat for you again in a minute. But like Sim says, it's similar to Shochu from Korea. Shochu is also similar to soju. Man, I thought I was going to get the Gaelic card today with all the Korean and Japanese coming at me. But yeah, so when you flavor shochu, it then becomes a shu, but in a different way. So if you flavored shochu with yuzu fruit, which is similar to a lemon, you get yuzu shu. If you flavor it with plums, the word for plum in Japanese is ume, so you get umeshu. So typically shochus are ones that either stand on their own or they're then flavored. But yeah, super cool stuff. Highly recommend. Obviously, if you're in Japan, you've got to try it because it's also super cheap. And it's not crazy alcoholic. It is very similar to a fortified wine, around that like 17%, 20%. So it can get a little bit higher, but yeah, really interesting stuff. So Brendan, it's very different for red fruited water. Yeah, it is still distilled in the same way. So not barrel aged. It's very rare to get barrel aged sake from everything I've seen. Shochu is much more common. You can get aged shochu, actually records dating back to some of like the early Edo periods. I think there was, I've got it in this book here. There's record of some workers on a temple who graffitied the wall and were like, the priest was so stingy, he didn't even give us any shochu for the work we did at the end of the day. So very, very old spirit. They have been barrel aging it for a long time. Please ignore my cat in the background if you can hear him. But yeah, so sake used to be more barrel aged, but now it's not. Shochu is more barrel aged now. I highly recommend it. It's if you can get old barrel aged shochu, it's incredible. But yeah, so this was so this whiskey was part of the 2019 limited releases, same as the same as the signature when they were first released. So this is matured in ex-shochu and virgin European oak casks. Doesn't say where in Europe the casks are from, but the shochu cask finish on this whiskey was for 7 years, and it makes up 83% of the mix. And then the other portion of the battered whiskey in is 5-year-old European virgin oak, cask matured Cu Bocan. So it is very predominantly shochu vibes. Michael says orchard fruits, pears, pastry custard. Oh my god, I'm excited! I'm really excited to taste it. But yeah, so previously this would be one of the first shochu casks that we've seen, because previously it would not qualify as whiskey. The Scotch Whisky Association changed the rules back in 2017, 2018, and it allowed the use of maturation in casks from around the world, as long as there is documented heritage showing that that spirit was traditionally matured in a cask. So that means things like tequila, calvados, shochu, and a couple of other spirit types I can't remember right now, which have historical relevancy as being matured in cask, are allowed to be used. It still excludes liqueurs and cider, unfortunately, because they don't qualify as spirits. And for some godforsaken reason, despite the fact that cider is one of the biggest products out of the UK and one of the biggest consumed things aside from beer, it also tastes great when you mature whiskey in it or finish whiskey in it. Cider is not allowed because it's a fruit-based product. It's very, very sad and very annoying. But yeah, so the two bulk customers that we were talking about earlier, Takara Shuzo is actually not a person, it's a company name. It's short for Takara Shuzo International Co. And they produce sake and other Japanese beverages. So we can probably assume the shochu cask came from one of them. The other likelihood is that they came from the smaller part owner, which is a company called Marubeni Corporation. So after hunting through a couple of Japanese web pages and translating them with Google, thank God for that, I've narrowed it down that likely the Shochu barrels came from probably either Shochu 3650 brewery or Benino Tomi brewery, who both do barrel aged barley based Shochu. So probably one of those. And now I just want to get my hands on them and try them to compare. I think that might be an untapped idea, is doing a whiskey and shochu pairing, as we see more shochu casks coming out from Scotland in the future. That could be cool. What do we think of this one? Yeah, Karen's like mildly nodding. I'm finding they're all really quite soft on the nose. Is anyone else picking up that? Yeah, getting a lot of nods. Yeah. Tim says it's definitely more interesting than the first two. Yeah. It's definitely got like a little bit of something to it. Kind of tastes like walking by the riverside in like cherry blossom season or something. Just like very, yeah, sweet, floral, earthy. Cool. Whiskey number 4. But yeah, I'm super curious to see more distilleries use shochu casks in the future. I think it'll be really interesting to see, because I find that like tequila can be quite abrasive, and then Calvados is another one that's quite a domineering spirit. But yeah, it should be interesting. Alrighty, whiskey number 4. Now, this was the first in the creation series. Correct me if I'm wrong, Larry.
This is the Andean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is creation number 5. So it was the 5th release in the series that they came out with, which was kind of interesting because we had never ever seen anything about Andean oak before, and so it was quite, I think, quite different to the traditional style of whiskey that we've come to see. But I guess at the end of the day, you guys are going to have to try it and see what you think about it. It's one of my favorites that has come out of the range so far. Again, not heavily smoked. You're not going to get much. If anything, I would say that the previous one that we've just tried was probably one of the more heavily smoked ones, and everybody's going to say, well, what are you talking about? There wasn't much smoke going on in there. But yeah, the creation 2 was the what they considered a more heavily smoked. I'm not sure the ppms though of this.
Yeah, I think like probably the fact that they're in the shochu one, there was that 5-year-old, so you're probably getting a little bit more smoke carrying through from that 5. But if it only makes up 17% of the vatting, it's not like strong enough. Tim, I completely agree. The nose on this is a lot richer. It like definitely has this almost red frog lollies thing to it, like erring on frogs in a pond. But yeah, so I mean, look, we put the full name on the bottle, Colombian Andean oak, but Andean is just saying that the oak came from forests in the Andes mountain range, which spans across 7 South American countries, all the way from Venezuela at the top down to Chile and Argentina at the very base tip of South America. So yeah, the wood from these casks would be sourced from the Colombian forests along the Andes. I know that they initially said on their website or something that it's the first single malt release using these casks. It is technically the first single malt release using these casks, but the Black Bottle blended whiskey did finish a release in ND and oak. So they're not the first, but they're the first single malt. But yeah, so this specific creation number was actually distilled in December 2011. So again, winter distillation, filled into refill American oak, and then it was finished in the Indian oak for a little over a year. So yeah, Tim's getting subtle chocolate. Maybe you've got COVID. Mate, if everything smells like chocolate when you have COVID, that's not the worst thing in the world. As long as you're okay and healthy. Brendan, yeah, is almost an artificial sweetness. Yeah, it's kind of like it's when your mum makes frogs in a pond and then it comes out of the fridge the next day and you're like eating it and all the outside of the chocolate is soggy from the jelly or jello or whatnot. It's a little bit that, like, interesting. Ooh, but the palate's really cool. Tim's getting boiled lolly. Yeah, nice. Rob, are you not familiar with frog in a pond? Well, this is the struggle of being caught between the American and the Australian in me. Like fairy bread, frogs in a pond, all those like lazy parent desserts stand out in my memory. John, this is the most complex so far. It has longer lingering taste, but others have been gentle, easy, but unremarkable. This one seems to step up. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely got, it feels like it's got a little bit more body and a little bit more chewiness to it, for sure. Yeah, Michael, has to be raspberry aeroplane jelly. Rob, I don't think it's a Melbourne thing. Blue Heaven is a Melbourne and Tasmania thing, but no. I'll have to make you some. But yeah, it's really interesting to see as well, like comparing. So obviously the signature had a little bit of virgin American oak. The 12-year-old, the Japanese Shochu had a little bit of European virgin oak. So yeah, it's really kind of curious to see how an oak, because I would imagine it's virgin, not something that's typically used in whiskey production, like virgin Indian oak, whether it's going to be a new trend or but even comparing the flavor profiles of the three is really cool.
An interesting thing with the Andean oak, Emma, you were talking about Mount Gay earlier. So they've produced quite a few of their rums using Andean oak. It seems to be something that they do on a regular basis. So whether this now becomes a trend and we're going to see more whiskies, Scottish whiskies, being produced using Andean oak, may well be. We might see that coming up.
Well, I know that there's another oak type or another wood type that is currently all the rage in rum production. It's not Andean, it's something else. I think from South Africa or somewhere like that. But yeah, so they're like starting to really get into it in the rum world. And so, you wonder how long it'll take for it to come over to the Scottish world. But yeah, super interesting. I think, look, so from everything I've heard from speaking to distillers and producers, when you work with different oak types, it can be like really a gamble. Distillery from Australia that I cannot name, sadly, but they did an experiment with Jarrah casks, so Jarrah wood casks, and they were like, we're never going to release this because it leaked almost all of the whiskey out of it. It is too astringent, too leaky, too difficult to work with. We've already tried fixing it like 6 separate times, and it's been the cask for like 5 years. It's just not worth it. But it was a fun experiment and whatnot. So, there's always that risk when you're playing with new cask types. And even we see a lot more Mizunara cask as well in whiskey production. Quite a lot of people and particularly Japanese distillers, are using Mizunara cask. But even something like that, it actually has to be older than oak for it to be good enough into the chemical composition that it's useful. I believe it's like 80 years old is how old a Mizunara oak tree has to be before you can even think about cutting it down to turn it into a barrel. And even then, when you do, it's still really leaky, not as leaky as Jarrah, but it's still quite a leaky cask, which is why when you see Mizunara cask on a whiskey and it's a slightly higher price, you're like, oh, okay. Whenever I see that, I'm like, that checks out. They must have lost a lot of whiskey from putting it in that barrel. So really interesting. Tim says, this is easily your favorite whiskey so far. Yeah, I think it's mine too. David, I feel this one has more body. Michael, a bit of raspberry spice on the finish. Rob, sounds great from marketing view. What about using a Boab tree? Look, again, I don't know. A large part of it as well is you don't want to poison people. It's the reason that we use oak is because, well, firstly, it's really easy to work with. It's porous, but not too porous. It's like a hardwood, but it's still malleable. But also there's no toxins and chemicals that will kill us. Some trees, the sap has stuff that's not good for us, makes us sick. So like I can't remember what tree it is, but one tree, the sap produces like a salicylic acid. And it was what Tibetan monks used to essentially preserve themselves when they were dying. But yeah, so you don't really want to be consuming salicylic acid through your whiskey. And yeah, others have other toxins and stuff like that. So you have to be like really careful about the edibility factors of the tree first before we can even think about it. And then even coopering it into a barrel is like then the next question after. Yes, you can lick this wood. It is safe to safe to go near edible substances. And then, okay, how can we mold it into something? So I'd be really curious to see, because if anyone read my article on casks where I geeked out about it a bit, some of the early Abyssinians and Egyptians were using the heart of palm trees because it was sort of like already kind of good to go. But yeah, but we haven't really seen a lot of the palm tree casks. Maybe we will in the future. Maybe little funny little quarter casks of palm would be interesting. And I imagine, there might be sugar compounds that come out of that. But yeah, I think we're in an age of experimentation in whiskey, which is awesome, unless they go too far, but it's still awesome for the time being. And yeah, I think we're starting to learn even more stuff. David loves the idea of being preserved in whiskey. That is, I'm certain some monarch or something from ages ago has done it, but I like the old school, old school methods of cocking it. So we'll move on to whiskey number 5 though, because speaking about like early casks and early cask styles, so the Celtics actually were really the first to kind of bring casks into what they were drinking. So 13th century Celts were the first to really do metal hoops around their barrels that they would then store their beer in, which was really cool. And that trend came across to all the other cities. And we talk about globalization being a modern thing. It's absolutely not. People were stealing ideas and doing cool things all across the world, even in the 13th century. So, but yeah, so beer matured or stored in casks was a big thing. So obviously, if you're a distillery like Tomatin doing cool casks, you have to have a cool beer cask. So this is creation number 1. This is a creation number 1, and this was the third of the set of limited edition series from 2019. So this is matured in both Imperial stout casks and Muscatel de Setúbal. Really testing my Portuguese, but Muscatel casks as well. So Black Isle Brewery is an organic brewery in the Highland region up near the coastline. It looks really, really cool. Check out their website if you get the chance. It looks spectacular. And if it wasn't far north of where I'm going to be, I would absolutely be visiting. But the brewery's been around since about 1999. And this Imperial Stout is one of the darkest and strongest beers they've ever made. It's in the style of a Russian Imperial Stout, which was a seasonal release they did. It looks like, sadly, they're not making it anymore. They have a series of rotating seasonal beers, which is really cool. And everything that they produce at the brewery is organic, which is really cool. Not something they don't say on the Cu Bocan bottle, but yeah, super interesting. So this is a vatting of casks that started out in ex-bourbon, and then 28% were finished for 7 years in the Imperial Stout casks. Did I mix this right? No, yeah, 28% were finished for 7 years. It's not really a finish, kind of like a second maturation in Stout cask. And then 72% was actually moved into Bacalhau, Muscatel, de Setúbal wine casks for 4 years. And then both were decanted and then vatted back together. So yeah, really, it's like not a predominant beer cask, but it is still like very distinctly, I mean, Russian Imperial Stouts are quite hefty in the beer world. So, still give a really strong profile. The Muscatel casks in this are from one of the largest wineries in Portugal, Bacalhau. And the business has been around for over like 100 years. And some of the bodegas and vineyards are almost 500 years old. And it's from, the Setúbal municipality, unsurprisingly, which is a coastal region just south of Lisbon. So yeah, super, super cool. Oh my God. Oh, that's so wild. It smells like Christmas time with my very English family. That's so cool. I loving the comments. I like the nose. Beautiful nose, says John as well. Tim, nose is pretty complex with stout and muscatel kind of competing. On the palate, you get creamy chocolate coffee, typical of Imperial Stout. Muscatel is more nose for you, Stout's more palate. Rob, that's delicious. At what point did they add the duck's nuts and bee's knees into the cask? Probably slightly before bottling. Yeah, it's incredible. John, the mouth is as nice as the nose. That's a beauty. Oh yeah, wow. It's got like a lot of character to it as well for the 46%. That's super cool. Oh, Tim, is this one still available? I am not certain. I do, however, conveniently have a discount code for you guys. So you can check out what we do have on the website. If it's up there, amazing. If it's not, yell at Larry until he can get some more. But yeah, so we're doing 20% off all of the Cu Bocan that we have on the website for you guys tonight. But yeah, that is super, super cool. Brendan, probably just because I've been talking about beer, almost get a carbonation sense. It is kind of like the bitterness of Russian Imperial Stouts, but like almost transformed into a fizz on the tongue. Is kind of how I definitely get. It's like a spice, but like a beer spice. That's super cool. Rob, out of stock. Oh no. Damn it. It's always the way. I don't think we got much of this in, did we, Larry?
No. We
No.
didn't. Unfortunately, that one is all done and dusted now. So it's really archived stuff. But I think it's quite important that people see the history and how this whole experimental series has been progressing over the years. So apologies if you're falling in love with something that's now finished, but we did want to get you guys some of the whiskies that just no longer available, and you get to try at all of them.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, Rob, you are, yes, he's an absolute tease. You should hear it when he tells me about all these lovely Lechags that we have coming in, and then I have to wait 6 months until they land in the country, and I'm like, damn it, you made me wait so long. But yeah, so well, I would imagine they've got more beer casks, that they're working on in the future. I mean, this is absolutely spectacular. So yeah. Michael's fairly complex. I get the heavy stout and dryness from muscatel, a bit of red berry nuts and dark chocolate bitterness. David's grateful for the chance to taste it. Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's why we do these things, right? Like, half the time we'll bring in a bottle just so that we can crack it and share it and all get the chance to taste it. So yeah. Alrighty. Well, we might move on to the final. Oh, I've cooked it. Ugh. So out of practice. I get 2 weeks off and then don't know how to type anymore. Alrighty. Well, we might finish off on the last whiskey of the night. And then I'll run the poll. With the poll, you can vote for your top 2 favorites, though I will not be surprised about which one takes the lead. But yeah, so the Cu Bocan 15-year-old, fully matured in Oloroso sherry casks, so not a finish at all. And this was part of our Whiskey Show exclusive release for this year. The theme was obviously sherry. So I think, Larry, you can probably tell us a little bit more about this whiskey and how it came about and how we selected it.
Yeah, so this is relatively new to the Cu Bocan range, in that, first of all, it's the oldest expression that they've done, and this is the first batch. So there is the intention to continue offering a 15-year-old Cu Bocan in the range. Whether it remains to be a sherry bottling or not, I'm not sure at this stage. But there's a couple of differences between this and the other expressions besides the age. First and foremost, this one is bottled at 50% ABV instead of 46%. So that is one of the things. The second thing is that this is a limited release. Now, I did say that all the Cu Bocans are kind of limited releases, but this in particular is small quantity. So it's they produced only 6,000 bottles of this, and people might say, well, 6,000 is a lot of bottles, but not really. If you in the whiskey industry, anything less than 100,000 bottles is small. When you're down to 6,000 bottles, it's tiny. And if you consider that those 6,000 bottles have got to be shared across the planet, it's not a lot. So this was given to us on allocation basis. So we were lucky. I know that some countries didn't get any, but we managed to get some stock of it at the 50%. I believe the barrels they were using were from a bodega called Fernando de Castilla. Maybe Emma knows more about them than I do. But I absolutely love this particular whiskey. It's not the heaviest sherry bomb that you've ever tried, but it is fairly rich and nice and chewy kind of whiskey. You're going to get more of the sun-dried kind of fruits rather than that, the heavy sort of thick syrupy kind of style that a PX cask would offer you. Touch of citrus comes through for me, and then obviously the smoke is there, but again, it's more an earthiness than a smoky style of whiskey. And for me, it just kind of works. You're getting that exotic spices, a little bit of the dried fruits, and then the citrusy elements, like from an orange style rather than a lemon style. But that's kind of, for me, is what just works beautifully about this particular whiskey. So I'd be keen to see what everybody thinks about it. And as I said, this is my favorite in the range. And if they carry on with this particular style, I think it bodes quite well for the blend. Bearing in mind that being a distillery that doesn't make peated whiskies, they're not trying to be an Islay style of whiskey. It just wants to give a degree of characteristic to the whiskey by adding a hint of that smoke in there, and I think it kind of works.
Yeah, I think like the base flavor profile of the spirit as well, you can always, like, that is your base, you can't get rid of it. So when you add peat to it, that can really morph and change. Edredauer is like a great meaty spirit, but then you peat it and it gives it this like mushroom fungusy delicious, like fancy mushrooms on pizza kind of quality, or bacon if you put it in a sherry cask. But yeah, and I think that this is like just that right little amount of peat as well, where it stops it from being super sweet sherry bomb as well. Like I haven't tried any of the Tomatin age statements anytime recently, but I know that they can towards that sweeter, jammier style. So Michael, something like blood orange marmalade, as soon as I saw that, I was like, yes, absolutely. It's got a bit of that like dried strawberries thing, the ones that they coat in chocolate and stuff. But yeah, super, super good. Brendan says typical nice sherry whiskey. I rate it. Rob suggests they should go with port 15-year-old next time. That could be good. John, nice nosing, delicious sherry, lovely color. It is natural color and non-chill filtered, I believe. Yes.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. When you bottle at 46% as well, you don't really need to chill filter either. It's once you dip below that ABV level that a lot of distilleries decide to, just because for the structural integrity is probably the right word of the whiskey. Oils tend to come out of suspension when it's brought down below that. So, and that's why they chill filter. But yeah, if you're at 46%, you're in the pretty safe range where you don't need to. Michael can finally taste the peat, it seems. No, nah. I think peat adds a bit of complexity. But yeah, really, really cool. Yeah, super interesting. And yes, to what Larry was saying, Fernando de Castilla is one of the like most highly revered independent sherry houses in Spain. They're based in Jerez, Spain, and they're like, again, in that kind of organic vibe, no herbicides, no pesticides, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, they're a small winery that produces some of the world's best sherries. So pretty much as soon as you see Fernando de Castilla label on a barrel or on a bottle, I'm there. I would like 10 bottles of it, please. Like, I rocked up to Bunnahabhain, saw that they were doing hand fills out of a Fernando de Castilla Manzanilla sherry cask, and I lost my nana. They were like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, now that I have this whiskey to try." But yeah, really, really incredible quality sherry casks went into this, which is amazing. So I will pop through the Rob will take 10 of the stout. You may have to hunt down some people for it. Not quite sure, but yeah. I would make things happen, but I'm sadly not the person who can make things happen in this case. So but I will share the 20% off code again. If you found that one of the other ones that we do have in stock strikes your fancy, you may as well get a discount. And I'm going to run the poll as well to find out what the pick of the night is. So you can vote for your top 2 whiskies. we open it up to 2 because sometimes you just can't pick your favorite child. But yeah, leave it there. So Larry, we're expecting to see maybe a couple more Cu Bocans coming into Australia in the future.
Yep. That is definitely the intention. So I guess watch the space. Interestingly, Tomatin's one of those distilleries that's got a huge range of diverse sherry casks, from Manzaniers, Amontillados, PXs, etc. The biggest stock is in the Olorosos, but they do have a lot of different sherry casks. I suspect we're going to see more along that vein. Under the Tomatin label, they do a 14-year-old in a port cask. I think somebody was asking about the port, and it's beautiful. I've just been trying to find out who might actually have some of that creation number 2. I think
the stout cask.
That's in the Shochu, or was it?
Oh, number stout? 1, the stout cask.
Let me have a look and see. Okay, so I've just been looking amongst the retailers out there, and World of Whiskey has still got some stock. They used to be the distributors of Tomatin, so whoever's looking for it, they're in luck. They can go to World of Whiskey. They actually still have some stock. I don't know how much, but there you go.
Amazing. Look at that. Larry on the case. I love it. Well, I think we got, it was nearly a 3-way tie for first place there for a second, but we had someone give the final deciding vote, and it is still kind of a tie for the top of the night. But I think not too surprising, the creation number 5 Andean and the creation number 1 stout cask are on equal first. That is amazing to see. The 15-year-old taking up second place in the Shochu. Look, we no love for the signature 12, but the first whiskies of the night never get the same love. So it's something that we've learned to expect now. But yeah, I will definitely probably be drinking them in a nice refreshing drink if the weather ever gets nice in Melbourne again. So, but yeah, that brings us to the end of the tasting. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We love putting on these break-even ones. The company is about sharing whiskey. It's what we love to do. We love to share whiskey and get people trying new stuff. So, very exciting. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hopefully we'll see some of you at the next virtual tasting. I know Michael, Ian, Karen, most likely. But yeah, no, it was absolutely wonderful to have you all. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.
Bye all.